Hello, how are you doing? Good, I hope. Anyways, this is a rating of The Walking Dead Season 2, and I guess this means I'm officially back because I might as well do the rest of the show. Now, a couple things before I start this video. Some video related and some season related. So let me hop into video related first. Now, I wrote a script this time around because, I saw the last episode and I experienced it because I made it. There was a lot of awkward pauses, and this isn't your traditional script. This doesn't tell me exact sentences to say, but it does give bullet points on what to talk about. I wrote it in pros, cons, wrote things that I should talk about, like what I'm about to talk about right now, and I just wrote the scores down on each one. I had done that for the other one, but that's all I wrote. Now, season related things. I think this season is better than season 1. Spoiler alert, the overall score for this season is going to be lower than season 1. This season is twice as long though, so that's not fair. Next up, I've been reading the Walking Dead comics, and that wasn't intentional. I didn't plan on it while rating this show, but I just thought it'd be a good idea to read the comics. And I've started to rewatch the show now that I've been reading the comics at the same time that I'm reading the comics. And I've been watching it with this comic reader perspective, basically. And honestly, it really does make the show so much better because of one word, and that's tension. The tension is really much higher when you put yourself in this hole. You read the comics and now you're watching the show for the very first time. So I highly recommend that you watch it like that as well, and that you read the comics because they're honestly pretty good. And now a main criticism that I'm pretty sure all us Walking Dead fans have heard about this season, of that we probably have. I know that I kind of do have it, but not as bad as other people. And that's the farm setting. People like to crap on the farm setting, say that it ruins the season, kills the pacing, and I only think they're half right. What I do like about the farm setting is that it develops every character and that it really has the actors carry most scenes due to the fact that they're literally just around flatland. Before I start rating the episodes, I just want to start by saying some of these episodes are not going to have cons, but that doesn't mean that they're 10s. It just means that they struggle with pacing, because basically this whole season struggles with pacing. But without further ado, let's get into the episode, starting with episode 1, What Lies Ahead. Right, this premiere is definitely not better than season 1's premiere, and it'll be like that up until season 5. I really think that season 1 premiere was hard to top, but they somehow managed to do it. First pro I'll start off with is Daryl saves T-Dog. Now, throughout the season, I'd rate Daryl along with Shane and Rick in terms of development. I think Daryl goes really far and is the most underrated character in this entire season. Now, people could make the argument that Daryl fighting alongside them in episodes 3 and 4 in season 1 were him starting to care about the group, but I think this is when it truly started. As you could also make the argument that in those episodes he was just doing it out of a sense of depth because they helped him find Merle. Next pro will be the Glenn Water Shane scene.
Hey, save me some.
I like this scene. Now for arguably the biggest pro of this entire episode for me, which basically carries episodes 2 and 3, is now we have cons, and the con that drags this episode down the worst is Sophia goes missing. Like I said, I like this season better than season 1, and this is honestly probably the biggest part because of it. I just love the fact that everybody looks for Sophia, and it creates internal conflict, develops Daryl of all characters. You'd expect it to develop Carol. The one thing, however, that really just doesn't do it for me is how it starts. At this point in the apocalypse, I'm pretty sure it's been established that walkers aren't fast and anyone can outrun them as long as you're over the age of like 5. And while I get that Rick was just trying to protect Sophia, make sure she doesn't get attacked or bit, he could have just told her to run ahead as he fights off the walkers instead of making her hide somewhere and then he leads them away. I get that in season 2, especially at the beginning, they're not as slow as they eventually do get, but they are pretty slow to the point where you could outrun them, especially since Sophia's 10. She could definitely outrun walkers. And the other con I'll list for this episode is that nobody hears Andrea in the RV. I don't know. Now we move along to episode 2, Bloodletting. This is our introductions to Herschel and Maggie, which are, well, Herschel's a top 10, Maggie's a top 5 character. Not for me, but of all time, and for me too. Along with that is my first mention of the word tension, and it's definitely not going to be the last. Like I said, I'm reading the comics, and for those that didn't know, in show terms, Shane dies before season 1 even ends. It's before they even leave the camp, actually. Shane just goes crazy, tries to fight Rick, and then Carl shoots him in the neck, and then Shane dies. And that's the end of Shane. And now the reason this creates tension is the fact that when you're putting yourself in that comic reader perspective, watching the show for the first time, you think that anytime soon Shane's going to be getting his ticket punched, as he didn't die before season 1 ended, which is how it should have been. And the show vaguely baits you into thinking that, you know, he might die honorably instead of dying like an insane lunatic in the comics. And even though obviously he makes it out and Otis is in fact the one that dies, doesn't happen in the comics, by the way. This school stuff really did have me at the edge of my seat, especially because at this point Shane isn't really as insane as he eventually does get. It's shown that he's become a little possessive over Lori and Carl, but he's not really insane. Moving on, we got episode 3, Save the Last One. Now this is when Shane becomes insane. A pro of this episode is it continues the school scene and finishes it, and to a lot of comic readers' surprise, Otis dies. And I do think this scene is what really carries this episode. Apart from Daryl looking for Sophia and Glenn meeting Maggie. Was cons? Like I said, apart from the school scene and the scene showing Carl just... There's not really much to this episode, but I did enjoy it more than the previous two. Cherokee Rose. This is definitely one of the weakest episodes in the entire season, but I mean, it does have some solid pros. We got the well scene, we got Maggie and Glenn.
I'll have sex with you.
And Lori finds out she's pregnant. Apart from that, we got some really slow pacing. Number 5 episode, Chupacabra. Alright, these next 3 episodes are my favorite episodes in this entire season, even though there is another very highly rated episode later. We get more of what we got a glimpse of in episode 1, and that is Daryl really starts caring for this group, and this search for Sophia he has, where he almost dies, is definitely the best example. And once again, the tension is insane. For most basic Walking Dead fans, we know that Daryl doesn't exist in the comics. So much like with Shane, we don't know when or how this guy could die. And the fact he makes it out of this episode completely alive.
No!
This is definitely one of those on your edge seat episodes of The Walking Dead, and it's definitely not the last. But apart from Daryl, we have one of the greatest dialogue scenes in this entire season, and that is Shane and Rick arguing whether the search for Sophia is pointless. Now this brings up the morality of The Walking Dead. Both Rick and Shane make amazing points, and Rick's talk to Lori is basically what the viewers are thinking. I mean, if it was us or if it was your child, would you want to stop looking? But Shane brings it to a realistic point. As he said, in this current world, after a couple of hours, you're basically just searching for a dead body, and they live in a world where there is people eating monsters everywhere. And now we move on to the cons, and honestly, if these 2 cons weren't here, this might be just the highest rated episode of the whole show. Now, first off, Andrea's a moron.
No!
But second, this is one of the most in-depth cons I think I'll ever do in this entire complete rating of the show. And that is that I haven't really brought it up, but Lori is definitely one of my least favorite characters in this whole show. And season 5 really... Episode 5 really gives me another reason as to why I don't like her. And it is the beginning where we see helicopters dropping bombs in Atlanta where Rick currently is. Now, back in season 1, episode 3, it gets revealed that Lori is now angry with Shane because Shane told her that Rick is dead. And I mean, while you could make the argument it's not safe to jump to conclusions. So basically, in my personal opinion, Lori has basically no reason to be mad at Shane for telling her Rick is dead. I mean, I fucking assume Rick is dead instantly if I saw them blowing up the city where he's in. And now we have episode 6, Secrets. Now, I love the fact that Glenn can't keep a secret, and that's a big pro of this episode for me. The fact that he just goes snitches to Dale about the 2 things that he was told to keep a secret. And apart from that pro, we have the fight between Rick and Lori because of Lori's pregnancy. And this is what I meant at the beginning about how the actors really carry scenes that they're in because it's mostly flat land. I mean, this is just the camera pointing at 2 actors fighting. And much like with Shane and Rick's last fight in the last episode, it does bring up some good points. You know, they both have extremely good sides of the argument. Lori argues that, why would you want to raise a baby in a zombie apocalypse? And I mean, is she wrong? Not really. But Rick says they should give it a chance. And is he wrong? Not really as well. And now we have what I believe is the mid-season finale. Pretty much dead already. Now, starting off again, Glenn is a snitch. He straight up tells the entirety of the group at the beginning of the episode.
Barn's full of walkers.
Apart from that, Rick wants Herschel to really like him, and what I like about it is that it's such a change from what he eventually becomes. Here, he just doesn't really care about the conditions of the isolated place they're living in as long as it's isolated. Rick helps bring walkers into the barn, and he definitely knows this isn't right and it's really dangerous for the group due to the fact that they live, like Shane says, a stone's throw from the camp. But Rick doesn't want his family out there in the world surviving. And our next pro is obviously that sweet, sweet barn scene.
Rick's dead.
And that's where Archon is. Now, the main thing I don't like is that Sophia is the last walker to step out of the barn, and it literally looks like she didn't know what was going on, like as if she just walks out, not because she knows people are there, but just because she wants some air. Rick shooting her is the part that I really like though, because I mean, it is his fault, and I'll stand by that in the most petty way possible. Now we have episode 8, Nebraska. Massive pro, as this is obviously the place where Rick gets his first kills. I wrote kill, silly. And another pro of this episode is definitely Herschel's rage.
I don't care what you believe. Get him off my land. I didn't want to believe you. You told me there was no cure, that these people were dead, not sick. I chose not to believe that. But when Shane shot Lou in the chest, and she just kept coming, that's when I knew what an ass I'd been. That Annette had been dead long ago.
And I really love that he eventually does become one of the wisest and best characters in all of Walking Dead history. Cons of this episode, pacing is probably one of the slowest episodes when it comes to pacing, and Lori finding Rick goes absolutely nowhere. Episode 9. Trigger finger. That makes sense actually. Here we have, well, this isn't technically the first human threat, as I guess you could call the Vatos the first human threat, but I like to call them the first human threat because they eventually made peace with those other guys. And much like with finding Sophia, we get another good question in this episode, and it's, should they save Randall? This is still a person at the end of the day, and leaving them behind just to die would definitely take some sort of toll on them, and well, they eventually do end up taking him back to the farm. Now we have the last 4 episodes, and episode 10 is the worst episode in this entire season. Rick and Shane fight, that's cool. and that's all. Now, I'm not really a behind the scenes guy, but, well, episode 11, Judge, Jury, Executioner. Like I said, I'm not a behind the scenes guy, but I did hear that the reason Dale died was because the actor was close friends with Frank Darabont and they were really mistreating Mr. Darabont, so he asked for his character to be killed off. And the star of this specific episode really is Dale. I love the talk he has with the entire group at the farmhouse. I love how he goes interviewing different members of the group, one of them being Shane, to spare Randall. And also we get our first indicator that Carl is a fucking lunatic.
Do it.
The only con I could really give this episode, besides the obvious pacing, was the fact that Dale dies, but it's still a pretty good episode, and it's somewhere in the middle or up there. Now we have 12 Better Angels. Oh, episode 12, Better Angels. Episode 12 is definitely my favorite episode in this whole season, and the number one reason is because of the barn scene with Rick and Carl. And the way they utilize it in season 3 for a specific episode that we'll get to when I cover that season is probably one of the best things they've done in the whole show. This is also consequently the episode where Shane dies.
Raise your gun.
The third pro, and another big pro, is that Randall is used really well by Shane, and it really does work. I also love the way he dies, because when Glenn and Daryl find him, it's when they draw the conclusion that he wasn't bit or scratched or just anything. It looks like he just died. Apart from that, I really can't find much cons in this episode besides the overused obvious one of pacing, but even then, the pacing in this episode is honestly really good. And this is going to be the highest rated in this whole season. Next up, we got the finale, finally, once and for all. It's better than the season 1 finale, but it's alright, I guess. The farm ends in a really good way. They all leave in separate groups and then find each other at the highway, which I think is really sweet. Callback to the beginning. And Rick snapping was long overdue, but done really well.
No matter what, I didn't ask for this. I killed my best friend for you people, for Christ's sake.
Alright, now let's give the scores for every episode and then let's tally it all up, shall we? Episode 1, What Lies Ahead, 7.8 out of 10. Episode 2, Bloodletting, 7.5 out of 10. Episode 3, Save the Last One, 7.9 out of 10. Episode 4, Cherokee Rose, 7.3 out of 10. Episode 5, Chupacabra, 8 out of 10. Episode 6, Secrets, 7.9 out of 10. Episode 7, Pretty Much Dead Already, 8.2 out of 10. Episode 8, Nebraska Car, 7 out of 10. Episode 9, Trigger Finger, 7.5 out of 10. Episode 10, 18 Miles Out, 6 out of 10. Episode 11, Judge, Jury, Executioner, 7.8 out of 10. Episode 12, Better Angels, 9 out of 10. And episode 13, 8 out of 10. And that gives us our grand total rating of 7.2 out of 10. I told you it wasn't going to be higher than season 1. Now, next up, we have season 3, followed by a holiday special, or the other way around, depending on my mood.